Hello there Scapers, my name is Pros and welcome to the third video in my trilogy of analysis of the new skilling methods which were released on Monday, the 6th of February. In the first video I analysed the perks and concluded which perks were the best. In the second video I analysed the three different strategies you can use in order to train Skillvention, these three being disassembly of crystal tools, disassembly of aromatic tools and siphoning of crystal tools. Now in this video I'm going to be comparing different methods of training with these tools for both firemaking and smithing. I'm going to be analysing the XP rates, the GP rates and various other things, so sit tight and I hope you guys enjoy, because it took me a long time to do all this testing and gather all the data and then present it in a form which hopefully makes a lot of sense. Let's kick things off with firemaking, and these are the different methods I'm going to be comparing for firemaking. The first five are going to be at any bonfire with at least 5 people there, or if you're using one of the Priftiness bonfires you don't really need 5 people, you still get the same XP per log, and this is the XP per log you will get at 99 firemaking, and the rate at which you burn is constant unless you have things like the rapid perk which will speed things up. I'm not going to assume that, I'm going to standardize everything, so 3.6 seconds per log. I'm going to ignore banking times and just look at it from this point of view. 3.6 seconds per log for pretty much everything except the protein logs, which take 4.8 seconds. So you burn 1000 logs an hour with the normal logs and 750 an hour with the protein logs. And the curly root method is a bit woolly, but I did a bit of testing and it took me on average about 10 seconds to cut and burn each root. For the curly roots, I'm also going to be assuming that you're going to be using the superheat form Seren prayer, which requires 91 prayer and requires you to do the light within quest. And finally, for the costs, these are the prices I'm going to be using. I just sold these items to check their GE prices. And because superheat form requires prayer, we're going to be assuming that we're going to be using the super prayer renewal potion, which is the cheapest way of renewing your prayer points. It's only 6.05 GP per second at 99 prayer. Alright, so here is the data. Remember that there is no charge rate reduction, no boosts, no perks or any items that give you any perks. And this table will only consider uniform costs, such as divine charges and prayer drain. It won't consider the cost of the specific tool method, because that will be dependent on you. So yeah, so from my testing, this is the tool XP you get per log, and as you would expect, it scales up from maples to elders but then drops for proteins. That's because they suffer a penalty just because they're proteins, and curly roots actually give you a massive amount of tool XP per log, although they take a lot longer to burn. For level 10, the least number of logs or roots, I guess, is via curly roots, and the most is via maples, as you might have expected. But because proteins are such bad item XP, it will take you 4 hours to get to level 10, which is pretty atrocious. Whereas it will only take you 1 hour 20 minutes with the elder logs. And in the process of doing this, you will gain around about a 618k firemaking XP across the board for the conventional methods. That's because I think Jagex have balanced the firemaking XP that you get per tool XP for the normal methods. Therefore, the only thing that's going to change is the speed at which you get there, but overall you will still get the same firemaking XP per tool XP, and hence the same firemaking XP per Invention XP for the normal methods. However, with proteins, of course, it's going to be much higher because they're much slower, and with curly roots as well, it's about double the amount of firemaking XP that you would get doing the conventional firemaking methods. Now let's go to the cost, and we found something really interesting here. Obviously elder logs are the most expensive method, but remember that this column considers the cost of the logs first of all, second of all the charges that you use, the divine charges that you use in the time that you spend in getting to level 10, and thirdly for the curly root method it also considers the cost of the super prayer renewal potion. And so all things considered, the cheapest method is the curly root method. Now proteins are 115k, that's purely from 4 hours of divine charge usage without any charge drain reductions uncovered. I'm not going to consider the amount of money you guys, or the number of spins you bought, because that's variable in order to get the protein logs. But yeah, so this is just GP. And another interesting thing to note is that I know I haven't mentioned which strategy you're going to use in terms of crystal tools or omatics, disassembly or siphoning. But if you remember from the previous video, disassembling crystal tools from my calculations gives you roughly 400k extra GP per crystal tool. So you can actually turn some of these guys into a profit. For example, the U method can be turned into a very negligible loss of 151k every time you level it to 10. That's not bad at all, because you're still getting 619k Firemaking XP an hour and barely spending 150k an hour as well. Plus you got the perks, which I haven't considered here, on your crystal tools, which will make it even better for you. So U logs are a very, very good method if you consider that. Proteins and curly roots will actually give you a profit if you consider that as well, because 115k loss will be turned into what, 285k profit. So something to think about there. And now if we consider the rates per hour rather than the rates per level 10, I guess, then the best is Elder Logs, no question about it. 348k Invention XP an hour, assuming you're going to be disassembling at level 10, not siphoning at level 12. And the lowest is Proteins at 114k. Notice that curly roots are still pretty good at 202k Invention XP an hour. Now this 202k Invention XP an hour is only if you use the crystal tinderbox. Realistically, what's going to happen is you're going to be, well, I hope you will be using the crystal hatchet and switching it out with the crystal tinderbox, because there are two actions per curly root cut. The first action is the woodcutting part. The second action is mainly firemaking and a bit of woodcutting, which you will have to sacrifice in terms of tool XP, because you can't wield both a hatchet and a tinderbox at once. So that number will actually go up if you consider the fact that you will be using a crystal hatchet for the first cut. But nevertheless, the firemaking XP per hour is highest with proteans, as you might have expected, and maples are pretty low. But the thing with maples is their cost per hour is only 75k. Now remember, like I said, the crystal tool disassembly method will bring this up from a loss of 75k to a profit of 325k an hour. And you can gather tens of thousands of these from miscellaneous, managing miscellaneous, so you won't even need to buy them from the GE or from anyone else if you do the managing miscellaneous thing on the side, although you do have to spend some money on that, but nowhere near as much as you would if you actually bought it from the GE. The most expensive method at 5 mil an hour is the Elder Log method, and the cheapest method is the Protein Log method per hour. Why is the Curly Root method so much more expensive? It's because you're using the prior pots for the superheat form curse, and again, haven't considered any of the things that will boost your rates or reduce the costs. So for example, you might want to use the Holy Wrench to reduce your prayer cost and prolong your trips at the Jadinko lair if you're going to do the curly root method. And yeah, it's pretty clear cut which is the most effective method. The most effective method is also the most expensive method, but the second most effective method for Invention XP happens to be the second most rewarding method for Firemaking XP as well. So that is the curly root method, and that's what I'm going to go into now. So let's summarize some of the things we know about the curly root method. Realistically, like I said, you're going to be using a crystal hatchet, which you'll swap out for the crystal tinderbox. So you're going to be using both, not just one. And if we explore the numbers behind that, well, you're going to be siphoning your crystal hatchet, and you get far less tool XP per root in terms of woodcutting for your crystal hatchet than you do for firemaking for your crystal tinderbox. Plus, you're going to be siphoning your crystal hatchet because it's so expensive to disassemble. Therefore, it will take you around 23 hours at my rate, the rate at which I did this. It's going to take you around 23 hours to get your crystal hatchets to level 12, but it's only going to take you just over 2 hours to get your crystal tinderbox to level 10. Now, in the profit and loss calculation here, I have considered all the costs, like literally everything you would need to consider. So that includes the crystal tool siphon, first of all, which is 1300k. Second of all, the super prayer renewals, and thirdly, the divine charges you're going to be spending, again without any mitigating factors taken into account. So the crystal tinderbox will give you a profit because, like I said, 400k profit per tinderbox. And if you summarize these numbers in terms of their per hour rates, well, it is pretty bad for the crystal hatchet, only 3.5k tool XP an hour as compared to 17.6k tool XP an hour for the tinderbox. That number could be much higher with boosts and also with experience, because I'm not very experienced at the Jidenko layer curly root method, and therefore my gains were pretty mediocre, to put it lightly. But anyway, the key part about this analysis is that you're going to compare the two Invention XP per hour rates and also compare the two profit and loss rates, because you're going to be doing these simultaneously. So what's going to happen, you're going to get 229k Invention XP an hour up from 202k, and you're going to basically break even 19k profit an hour. That is a significant number, because it means you are getting Invention XP for free, basically, for absolutely nothing. And it's not even a bad rate there, 229k up to 250, possibly 270k if you're good. And on double XP weekend, who knows, that could go up to, well, plus 50%, so 375k, possibly even up to 400k Invention XP an hour for absolutely no money spent. And you're getting a huge number of gains, over 600k combined woodcutting and firemaking XP per hour. But there's another side to this, and the other side is Smithvention. This is a lot more complicated than Firemakingvention, because there are so many different methods and they all have different XP rates and different rates at which you gain tool XP. But essentially it takes 2.4 seconds to smith an item and 2.4 seconds to smelt an item without any boosts. And although the RuneScape wiki and a lot of people say it's 1.8 seconds, it actually isn't. And this also applies to protein bars. So the progress bar you get whenever you start training smithing or making a bunch of items, the timer it shows there is wrong. It has been wrong for a while, actually. I'm not sure why. So I use my own timer and I timed it to be 2.4 seconds per item. Artisan's is 9 seconds per bar and protein is 4.8 seconds per bar, and this is important, it's 1.2 seconds for each disassembly, and that will apply to the breakdown 5 calculations I'm going to do. I'm going to be using a portable forge for all of these, except for Artisan's workshop, of course. And for Artisans, I'm going to be using a Valley Shield 4 and a Master Student perk, I guess, which you can get from gaining respect at Artisan's workshop. And I'm going to be assuming you're going to be following Suak's instructions for that extra XP per hour. The base XP I'm going to be assuming is what you see on here. Note that corrupted ore isn't boosted by the portable forge, unlike everything else, so that sucks, I guess, but why not? But you also have the Voice of Seren, during which you can smelt corrupted ore, but I'm not going to be assuming that here because I didn't manage to catch the Voice of Seren at Traherne during my testing, and the prices I'm going to be assuming are the ones you see on screen now. So it's much harder to calculate the tool XP you get for all of these methods, because with portable forges, not only is your skilling XP per hour increased by 10%, not counting the effects of Varrock armor, which speeds up your actions, or the rapid perk, but so is your tool XP, and that is very interesting. You want to be using the portable forge to train your smithing, not only for increased smithing XP, but also for increased invention XP eventually, except for the corrupted ore, which isn't affected by this. And an extremely important observation is that if you're going to be doing Artisan's Workshop, either for the trim requirement or AFK smithing training, make sure you wield your Shalador shield, and if you haven't got it, get it if you're going to be doing Smithvention and you're interested in getting the highest invention XP rates, because it basically doubles your tool XP per hour. And I'm not sure whether this is intended by Jagex, it may be changed in the future, but that 104.5 is 50 without the Falador shield, and it's about 90 to 91 if you don't follow Soak's instructions. So with all these assumptions, we can calculate the number of actions you would need to do in order to get to level 10, and the least number of actions, as you would expect, is at Artisan's Workshop because it takes so long, and the most is with the Addy offhand sword. Why am I doing the Addy offhand sword? Because it is the highest value Addy item that only uses 1 bar basically. And why would you want to make an item that only uses 1 bar? Surely that's much less smithing XP per hour. Yes, it is. It's also much less invention XP per hour, but if you're interested in the effects of the breakdown 5 perk, then it's very, very valuable, as you will see. So the fastest way to get to level 10 is sort of tied between Artisan's Workshop and Addy platebodies, and the slowest way is with protein bars. You don't want to be doing proteins for invention XP per hour. But conversely, the slowest smithing XP rates out of these is with Artisans, and the fastest is with protein protein bars. And also note, similar to Firemaking, Jagex have sort of balanced the amount of smithing XP you get every time you level up your crystal hammer or hammertron to level 10, and that's fairly standard across Corrupted Ore, Addy Platebody and the Addy Offhand Sword. Now this is the reason you would want to be doing the Addy Offhand Sword method. It's because you get an additional 90k Invention XP an hour just from the effects of the Breakdown 5 perk. And what you're actually achieving by using the Breakdown 5 perk is, yes, you're not going to be able to sell those items off. So smithing is basically like Firemaking, a pure loss skill, but you're saving tons of time of disassembly later on. Suppose you're going to be using the components you get from these materials later on to make gizmo shells or whatever. You basically don't have to do that. You're killing two birds with one stone. Depending on what you make, of course, you don't necessarily have to make Addy Offhand Swords. You could make whatever else is useful to you at the cost of lower smithing XP per hour, but at the benefit of a massive amount of time saved later on. This, of course, means that because it's pure loss, you're going to be spending a lot of money on this Breakdown 5 method. 21.2 mil versus 21.0 mil for the sword versus the plate body. Now that 200k, well not 200k, it's like 150k. That difference is because obviously you're spending 5 hours and that will use up 5 times as many divine charges as spending 1 hour for the Addy Platebody method. And don't look at your bank value, guys. It's going to be pretty painful if you're going to be doing Artisans. 33 mil spent to level up your crystal hammer up to level 10. And that takes 58 minutes. So that's how much you're going to be spending an hour with this method, including the divine charge cost of 155k. Is it 155k? No, it's like 28k, my bad. It's like 28k an hour because it's 5.5 hours. With the protein bar method, that's 156k. Now let's look at the XP rates. And the best Invention XP rate from any of the methods I've discussed today is with the Addy Platebody. Obviously it'll be higher if you do rune platebodies, but you'll also be mashing through a lot of money. And it's also the same for the Addy Ingot 3 method. Again, you're going to be mashing through a lot more money than you would with the Addy Platebody method. So as you can see, 34.2 mil per hour with the Addy Ingot 3 method, and just 21 mil per hour with the Addy Platebody and Breakdown 5 method. But of course the Addy Platebody method is very click intensive, and the Addy Ingot Artisans method is extremely AFK. Plus it's a trim requirement, so why not? So yeah, if you want the best smithing XP and the best Invention XP, Addy Platebody is the way to go. If you don't really care about smithing XP and you're willing to spend a bit more, then the best Invention XP is basically tied with the Addy Platebody and the Addy Ingot 3 method. You save a whopping 30 minutes for every hour of smithing that you do if you have the Breakdown 5 perk. That is very profound. They might actually nerf this once they realize how OP this perk is, especially because it's 100% chance of disassembling. It's basically like having a bone crusher every time you pick up bones. The only difference being that you're picking up the same number of bones as the number of items you smith. In this case, that's a really bad analogy, I know, guys, but that's the best I could think of at this time. Given all this analysis on these 11 different methods, how do you go about making your decision as to which method you want to use? Well, it all depends on what you value the most. So first of all, if you value Invention XP per hour the most above all else, then your best bet is to do the Addy Platebody method, or Rune Platebody if you really have the money for it, with the Breakdown 5 perk, because that perk gives you an extra 18k Invention XP an hour, just because you dismantle about 1500 Addy Platebodies automatically at 12 XP each. And it also happens to be quite good smithing XP an hour, one of the best in fact, so you can marry the two alongside each other, especially if you're going to do smithing for double XP weekend anyway. Just make sure you perk it up and you have tons of crystal tools in your bank ready to be used once the previous one has been disassembled. Unfortunately, the cost of this is 21 mil GP per hour versus only 5 mil GP per hour for the Elder Log method, which is only slightly slower, about a third slower, and the Firemaking XP you get is also pretty substantial. So both these methods are viable for double XP weekend training, but the only problem is the Addy Platebody method with this Breakdown 5 perk will cost you 44 mil GP. Okay, not 44 mil, 44 GP per XP, and that is a pretty high number. It's only 14.6 GP per XP. Even that is quite high, to be honest, with the Elder Logs. You probably want to do use like I talked about earlier, use or magics, but if you really want to go for it, you can go for these methods. They both have their advantages and disadvantages, and don't forget the massive advantage of 30 minutes of disassembly time saved per hour of doing Addy Platebodies. That's pretty much the only reason you might want to use the Breakdown 5 perk. I don't think it's worth using if if you want an extra 18k Invention XP per hour at the cost of an extra 14 mil GP per hour because you can't sell the Addy platebodies. So if you take that out, it looks much more manageable, only slightly more expensive than the Elder Log method at 15.9 GP per XP, and only slightly less Invention XP per hour as well, but much cheaper. Now if you want a fast and an AFK method, then you want to do Artisans if you're going for smithing, and Elder Logs again if you are going for woodcutting. Artisans is basically the same XP rate as Addy platebodies. It's much more AFK, but it's also much more expensive, about 50% more expensive, and that puts the GP per XP at a whopping 68.6 GP per XP. Would not recommend this unless you're going for the trim requirement at Artisan's Workshop. And that's with the Addy Ingot 3 method. Of course you could go more expensive and make it even faster by using rune ingots or by doing ceremonial swords, for example. And finally we come to the fast and cheap invention method, something that regular people would probably be looking for. But if you have enough corrupted ore from doing 120 mining or whatever, then that's the best sort of middle ground between fast and cheap. I guess it's completely free except for the divine charges you use up. So purely because of the divine charges, you lose 29k GP per hour, which is very agreeable. And that can be salvaged if you disassemble the crystal hammer whilst doing this method. That gives a loss of 0.14 GP per XP. And if you compare this with the curly root method, which is my favorite, it's about the same amount of time to get your tinderbox to level 10. But remember, the tinderbox isn't the only crystal item you're going to be using to train your invention. With the curly root method, you've also got the crystal hatchet, which will add another 18k invention XP an hour on top of the tinderbox. So that's a 229k invention XP an hour at a total gain of 19k GP per hour. Now there's an inconsistency here in that I have factored in the 400k profit per crystal tool, considering the previous video's analysis for the curly root method, but I haven't done the same thing for the corrupted ore method. Therefore, the corrupted ore method is going to give you a higher GP per XP rate than what you see on screen, which is why I've highlighted it in green. It's easily going to be higher than the curly root. You're going to make more profit than you do with the curly root method. But yeah, I gotta say my favorite method out of all of the ones I've just shown you is the curly root method, just because it's a nice balance between everything, and it's actually quite fun to do just because of how much skilling XP you get. 545k of firemaking XP an hour, that's crazy, and that can even go up to 600k plus with boosts and by doing it properly. And obviously that 600k will go up to 1200k, 1.2 mil XP an hour on double XP weekend, and your invention XP will go up by 50% and your cost will go down by 33% during double XP weekend as far as invention is concerned. And finally, let's just compare the 3 best invention methods, in my book at least. So the fastest smithing method, the Addy platebodies, the fastest firemaking method, Elder Logs, and my favorite method, the curly roots method, with switching between woodcutting and firemaking crystal tools. Let's go row by row then. So between 22 to 120 invention, the maximum skill XP you're going to get is from the curly root method, simply because it's combining 2 skills, and it's also the slowest invention XP per hour, which is why you max out your skill XP by the time you get to 120 invention. So 192 mil firemaking XP and 20 mil woodcutting XP by the time you get to 120 invention using that method. And the worst is obviously the fastest invention method, because counterintuitively, the faster you get to 120 invention, the less time you have to train your skill with which you're getting there. As far as invention is concerned, well, as you would expect, the crystal tool disassembly method, like I mentioned in the previous video, is profitable and the siphoning method isn't. So that's what comes out trumps here. Notice that the plus 32 mil is quite similar to the plus 34 mil that you make from the crystal tool method for Addy platebodies and Elder Logs. This is because your profit is dampened by 2 mil, guys, because you're using a crystal hatchet and siphoning that. And siphoning is the most expensive method as far as invention costs are concerned, which is why it's a minus 173 mil for the siphoning methods for both Addy platebodies and firemaking Elder Logs. Now, because Addy platebodies are so expensive, they are the most expensive method by far in terms of smithing costs, and you only actually lose 8 mil in terms of non-invention costs with the curly root method compared to bills and bills for the others. Why? This is because the 8mm is purely from the number of super prayer renewals you use in the course of using superheat form for all those hours, trying to get 120 invention and maxing out your skill XP as well. And if you add those two up, then predictably Smithvention while siphoning is extremely bad for your bank, and you pretty much break even, make a plus 24mm profit with the curly root vention. But there is a downside to all of this, because curly root vention is pretty much tied as the slowest method out of the three, alongside siphoning your tinderbox whilst doing elder logs, which no one would do, I guess. So curly roots is the slowest invention XP per hour method, and the fastest is predictably the Smithvention method. So those are the main numbers you might want to consider on your way to a 120 invention. Also remember, if you're going to disassemble stuff, you also need to spend some time at the bench and also away from the bench. First of all, making the crystal tool siphons out of the crystal parts you get so they can sell it off. And secondly, disassembling a ton of extra components. So I've ranked the amount of time you spend at non-Skillvention activities, and the worst for this is tied between crystal disassembly whilst doing Smithvention and elder logvention, because you need to dismantle slightly more components than with omatics, just because of those crystal tool siphons you need to make, for which you need extra imbued components, which you wouldn't have to collect if you were doing the omatic method. And the best for this is the curly root method, only because you don't need to disassemble as many tinderboxes, because some of the XP you get by siphoning the hatchets. So there's a combination between the two which adds up and makes this the best method in terms of comp gathering time, not including the two siphoning methods. No one would siphon. So what is my verdict, guys? Definitely do curly roots to maximize your peace of mind in terms of not losing bank, but also having a nice combination between skilling XP and invention XP. So that's what I would recommend that you train over double XP weekend. Remember that you can alter these numbers by 50% because of double XP weekend if you're planning for that, and you can also alter the numbers I mentioned earlier in terms of XP rates and GP rates and GP per XP rates. So I appreciate that was quite a hefty chunk of analysis. I hope you enjoyed it and you found it really useful. If you appreciate it, please drop a like and comment, and if you want to see more of these, then please let me know. These take days and days and days to make. The last one I did was back in March, so you can check that one out. That's comparing the three different invention methods like I compared in the previous video, but also including combatvention, which is the fastest method of training invention. So yeah, thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one.